tiny fishing nations of the Pacific become entangled in the superpower's net. This is the beautiful island state of Kiribati, some 5,000 kilometres out in the Pacific. Mr. Fraser says it's in grave danger of becoming a Soviet military base. His claim is based on the fact that Kiribati has just negotiated a fishing agreement with the Soviet Union. North and east of Australia stretches the richest tuna ground in the world, rich enough to keep some Pacific states afloat. Nations like Samoa, the Solomons, and the awkwardly spelt Kiribati. Such places are not the mere dots in the ocean they might appear. Each is ringed by a narrow band of territorial water, and since the late 70s by a much wider economic zone, embracing all marine resources, like tuna, for 200 miles. The United States, alone in the world community, disputes the ownership of fish within this wider economic zone. Marauding American trawler fleets are steaming off with catches worth hundreds of millions of dollars each year, leaving the islanders' humble craft struggling in their wake. It's provided a perfect opportunity for the Soviet Union to move in, and now the Pacific states are being squeezed between the competing interests of the superpowers. Tuna Sandwich is reported by David Marr.
Most of the tuna caught in the world is eaten in the United States, and this is what they want: skipjack and yellowfin. And they want it canned, and they want it for lunch. It's not apple pie that makes Americans American any longer, it's the tuna sandwich. Yet everything America takes from these waters is taken illegally. Japan, Korea and Taiwan all agree that these fish belong to these islands. They fish and pay license fees. The Americans just fish.
They came to the Western Pacific 4 years ago. American tuna boats called Piscinas, built to scoop fish out of the sea hundreds of tons at a time. That American fleet now fishes when it likes and where it likes in the Pacific. It ignores island law and international law. The islands see this as theft of their single greatest resource, tuna. Island police could see the boats, but not catch them. But a year ago, a West Australian shipyard lent the Solomons a patrol boat. As a sales gambit, it turned out a spectacular success. While running under a local crew, the boat heard that an American Piscina, the Jeanette Diana, had been sighted fishing in Solomon's waters.
The Commissioner of Police ordered us to sail direct to the scenes. Early in the morning, we saw helicopters flew over us. Then the Piscina was start to steam away for full speed. So we start to chase, do the chase at about 6:15 in that morning. We chased about an hour. When we came alongside Jeanette Diana, we communicate each other on the VHF. Then we identify ourselves on the captain. Then we ask him politely, we say, we are the Royal Solomon Island Police Force. Then we'd like you to stop. He said, no, I cannot stop. I will make my way to Papua New Guinea. Then we fired 3 shots across his bow. Then at the same time, he automatically stopped. Then we go alongside, and then I send my boarding party to board the boat.
What would you have done if he hadn't stopped?
If we don't stop, I think that will be a big problem.
In fact, Parda had to threaten to shoot the tanks of the helicopter before Captain Jose Finetti stopped the Jeanette Diana. The boat was brought to the Solomons' capital, Honiara. Captain Finetti and the crew were detained in a city hotel for a month while the Solomons worked out what they'd done. A mouse had roared. The new law of the sea gives the islands immense tuna resources. The problem is defending them. Solomon's police have old Australian 303s and one patrol boat to back its claim to the tuna against the only country on earth to dispute it, the United States.
We're the fishermen. We have to make a living. And that's where the differences are. The United States does not recognize any nation's claim to manage or conserve tuna beyond 12 miles.
Finetti and his crew came to trial here in the Solomons High Court, which had one central question to decide. Was the Jeanette Diana fishing?
Later, Finetti would call this a kangaroo court, but it could hardly have been more traditional, almost British. The acting Chief Justice was a young Englishman. Finetti himself was defended by a Sydney barrister, and key evidence was given by an English fisheries officer who found fresh fish in the Jeanette Diana's nets. Just how fresh it was demonstrated by a Japanese fishing master, a connoisseur of sashimi, who took fish from the Jeanette Diana's nets and ate it raw. Yet the captain, Finetti, claimed that he hadn't been fishing for 5 or 6 days, not since he entered Solomon Islands waters. The judge didn't believe him. By the end of the case, the judge didn't believe Finetti on any of the matters in dispute. He found Finetti had been fishing.
The vessel was not fishing. There was no evidence at all that there was any fishing by that vessel during the day.
There was fish in the net which was still edible.
Well, we can get into dispute on that.
Well, it was eaten.
Well, I think that we're in a very speculative area and a very interesting one, but I think it's an area where we get fisheries scientists involved as to whether you can determine from a piece of fish whether it was caught within the last 5 days or not.
Would you eat fish that had been lying for 5 days on the deck of a Piscina?
Well, obviously the answer would be no, but is that the testimony?
The court found it compelling testimony.
I have no doubt, the judge said, that Captain Finetti knew exactly what he was doing. I have no doubt he thought the risk of being caught was minimal. The motive was financial gain. The punishment should be accordingly. The judge fined Finetti $12,000, the owners of the boat $60,000, and the Jeanette Diana, with all its equipment, including the helicopter, was forfeit to the Solomon Islands. The price of buying that back was eventually set at a further $770,000. The judge hoped this would deter what he called widespread illegal fishing in the Solomons, but whether it did is extremely doubtful, because every cent of that penalty was paid by the United States government.
It was obliged to do so under law passed by Congress. The same law allows the fines to be recouped from any foreign aid allocated to the Solomons. And Congress obliged the United States government to embargo all Solomons fish and fish products. The embargo wasn't lifted until the Solomons joined negotiations to allow American boats to fish its waters in future. The Solomons were under embargo for 10 months after the capture of the Jeanette Diana. It cost millions more than the fines it provoked. This extraordinary legislation, which effectively encourages United States citizens to break international law and punish other nations for following it, is the result of the enormous influence in Washington of the tuna industry and its lobby, the American Tuna Boat Association.
I think the American ATA is a very strong lobbyist in the American government, I found out when negotiating the Jeanette Diana issue. Because whereas the American government can see the logic and rationale behind the presentation of my case, they always refer to the strength of the American Tuna Boat Association lobby.
In Washington, dolphins have more clout than Pacific Islanders. Since the late 1970s, conservationists have forced Piscinas in the old fishing grounds between California and Chile to release all the dolphins once caught and killed in the nets. That costs time and money. The fleet split. Between 40 and 50 of the giant boats headed west into the Pacific and made their headquarters here in American Samoa. This is America. Each year it celebrates the day the United States annexed it, a sort of Dependence Day. The harbour the United States Navy wanted then is now the headquarters of both the American tuna fleet and its tuna canneries. Labour is cheap in Samoa. The canneries of San Diego shut down and reopened here. They're the biggest taxpayer on the island now, and after the government, the biggest employer. No matter how many millions it costs to build and run one of these Piscinas, they're in fact worth very little unless they have a contract to sell their fish to one of the two canneries here in the harbour, Starkist and Van Camp. For Pacific Island nations wanting to make a go of their own tuna industries, they too must deal with these two canneries. The canneries set the price, and the price has been forced down sharply. Evidence of that is tied up at the end of Pango Pango Harbour. Some of the boats in this graveyard of Piscinas were brand new before the banks impounded them. The low price of fish and the high price of money and petrol are a powerful encouragement for the Piscina fleet to seek the biggest catch for the least cost anywhere.
This is the American Queen Whiskey Yankee Zulu 6929 calling Harbor Master.
This is Harbor Master. Go ahead, Captain Lewis.
Roger, this is the American Queen asking permission to sail, or?
Permission granted, Captain Lewis.
A couple of bad trips could ruin Captain Luz. His boat is expensive to run. The tanks of the American Queen hold 250,000 gallons of fuel at $1 a gallon.
We can catch up to 300 ton a day, but the average haul is between 40 and 60 ton. We look for logs or debris in the water. The debris attracts the bait and the bait attracts the fish.
In the tanks of supercooled brine below, Luz stows between 1,000 and 1,100 tons of fish each trip. He admits in a good year to 5 trips. Total value of the catch, about $4 million.
Okay, we start here from Samoa, go northwest, and we go by Tuvalu Islands, and continue northwest, and then north of Santa Cruz Islands, which belongs to the Solomon Islands, up to the zero line, and then go west and fish up to the 139 west. We normally fish 5 north, 5 south of the equator.
Like many of the Piscina skippers, Luz is a Portuguese-American. He once worked on the Jeanette Diana. He told us if he'd been there that day in the Solomons, I would have talked them out of it.
We have a chart on the vessel here where we can and where we can't fish.
And Kiribati, what's the status there?
Any of the islands belonging to the Gilberts or the Marshalls, we can fish.
You can fish those?
We can fish.
Yeah.
That's not how Kiribati and the rest of the world sees it. Once the Pacific states declared their economic and fishing zones, only slivers of high sea remained. Without poaching in the zones, the American fleet could not survive. The United States solution was simple. It declared that it would not recognize the zones applied to highly migratory fish. That meant one species of migratory fish only, tuna.
The tunas respect no lines. Therefore, we feel in economic terms, we have to therefore take advantage of these behavior and biological facts regarding the tuna to stay in business economically. This is a tough world. Let's say you and I decide we are going to establish a railroad